Typically, child abductors aim to demand ransom from their victims' families. However, in Texas and Louisiana, a series of peculiar child abductions unfolded. The suspect did not ask for ransom, but instead mysteriously returned the children home a few days later before disappearing without a trace. What exactly happened to them? On March 4, 2001, 320 kilometers from where 11-year-old Leah Henry lived, a 9-year-old girl named Nikki was playing outside her home in San Antonio when she was abducted in broad daylight. After an extensive search by police in the community, Nikki suddenly reappeared in front of her mother's house. The abductor had dropped her off and vanished without leaving any evidence. On April 16th, a month later, 11-year-old Lisa was playing jump rope with her sister in the front yard when a man grabbed her and drove off. Her horrified sister managed to provide a description of the suspect, a white man driving a white hatchback. 2 weeks later, Lisa too unexpectedly showed up in front of her home, and the abductor once again disappeared without a trace. No one could understand what was happening. By 2001, a serial child abductor was terrorizing Texas and Louisiana, evading law enforcement for months while targeting children across the region. Though he returned his victims unharmed, his motives remained unknown. That changed on May 1, 2001, when Leah Henry, an 11-year-old girl, became his final known victim. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in southwest Houston, Leah Henry enjoyed a happy life with her loving family. She was excited about the upcoming end of the school year and the adventures it promised. Meanwhile, reports of abductions were increasingly alarming nearby cities. At 7:30 a.m. on May 1, 2001, Leah eagerly boarded her school bus, excited for her school's celebration event. But by 5 p.m., her mother grew anxious when Leah hadn't returned home. Her parents frantically called friends, checked her school, and drove around the neighborhood, but found no sign of her. A neighbor reported seeing Leah getting into a car with a strange man. The police were immediately alerted, and a citywide search began. By May 2, Leah had been missing for nearly 24 hours. The FBI joined the investigation, and her distraught parents made an emotional appeal on television, pleading with the public for help. Nearly 200 volunteers joined the search. Investigators noticed striking similarities between Leah's case and 2 previous abductions. The suspect, a middle-aged white man driving a white hatchback, had been targeting girls aged 9 to 11. Despite months of searching, but authorities had failed to identify or capture him. Every passing hour diminished hope of finding Leah safe. But on May 4th, 3 days after her disappearance, Leah's father, Tim, received a phone call from the FBI at around 11 a.m. The FBI had critical news and requested to meet Tim in person. He quickly drove nearly 500 kilometers to the Kerrville County Police Station. There, in a secured room, Tim and his family witnessed something incredible. Leah had been found safe. However, she bore a somber expression that hinted at the ordeal she endured. While her abductor's identity remained unknown, Leah was finally reunited with her parents and sister. As she stood before a cheering crowd welcoming her home, Leah managed to smile, but her eyes betrayed lingering fear and unease. When news of Leah's rescue spread, everyone was eager to learn what the young girl had endured. Only Leah could shed light on the nightmare she had survived. On May 1st, as Leah was returning from school, the bus dropped her off near her house. She began walking home when a white car approached. A man leaned out of the window and asked, "Do you want to play with my baby?" Leah, remembering her parents' advice to avoid engaging with strangers, politely replied, "No thank you," and continued walking. However, as she neared her house, the man suddenly pulled his car onto the sidewalk, blocking her path. He persisted, asking if she wanted to meet his kids, trying to lure her into his car. The man appeared well-dressed and spoke in a friendly manner, which made Leah mistakenly trust him. After a brief conversation, Leah innocently agreed to get into the car. Moments later, as the man began driving, he reached over and snapped off the interior door handle. Leah's unease grew as she sensed something was wrong, but at only 11 years old, she couldn't fully comprehend the man's intentions. Her fear heightened when he turned into a deserted alley behind a restaurant. The man pulled out a gun and duct tape, binding Leah's legs and covering her mouth. He ordered her to crouch down in the car as he continued driving. Every passing minute felt like an eternity for Leah as she realized she had been abducted and might never return home. Her mind raced with fear, imagining the worst. Unable to see clearly out of the car, she desperately clung to the hope that someone might rescue her. Eventually, around 11 p.m., the car came to a stop. From Leah's description, they were in an empty parking lot near a highway, with no one else in sight. The man ordered Leah to crawl to the back of the car and remove her clothes. Terrified and unsure of what was happening, Leah screamed for help. In response, the man assaulted her, leaving her too frightened to resist further. Overcome with fear, Leah began sobbing uncontrollably. As the car resumed its slow journey, Leah's thoughts turned to escape. Though the door handle was broken, but she wondered if she could still find a way to open it. With her hands tied behind her back, she slowly leaned toward the door and tried to open it quietly, but her attempts failed. The man noticed her efforts and calmly warned, "You'll regret that." Not long after, he pulled over again, threatening to punish Leah if she tried to escape. At that moment, Leah felt like giving up, terrified that he might kill her. Later that night, the man drove to a small wooden cabin. He tied Leah's hands above her head with a rope and forced her inside at gunpoint, placing the gun on top of the TV. He locked the door and cornered Leah against the wall. Without warning, he began beating her so brutally that she lost consciousness. The next morning, Leah woke up to find herself tied to a table. The man loomed over her, warning that if she attempted to escape, he would hunt down her family and kill them. Terrified by the punishment, she endured the night before Leah understood the gravity of his threat. After delivering his warning, the man left the cabin, locking the door from the outside and leaving Leah alone in the desolate area. Determined to survive, Leah began struggling against her restraints, desperately searching for a way to free herself and escape the nightmare. When Leah could finally move around freely, she considered jumping out of the window. However, the fear of being caught by her captor and the thought of her family's safety held her back. Her mind was torn. She imagined her parents falling ill from the stress of searching for her day after day. Leah longed to return to them, but didn't want to risk causing them more pain. As the sun began to set, Leah heard the sound of the man's car pulling up outside the cabin. Panicked, she quickly returned to her restraints, pretending to still be tied up. The man entered the cabin carrying a newspaper. On the front page was a picture of Leah's sister, her face filled with anguish, searching desperately for her. The sight broke Leah's heart, but it also gave her a glimmer of hope. Her family was doing everything they could to find her. The man laughed coldly and said, "Eventually they'll give up and you'll never go home." But instead of breaking Leah's spirit, his words fueled her determination. If her parents were fighting to find her, she decided she would fight just as hard to survive. On the morning of May 3rd, the man left the cabin again. Leah managed to free herself from the ropes. This time she found her school backpack and took out her camera, determined to leave evidence of what had happened. She began documenting everything. She photographed the interior of the cabin, her bruises, and the surrounding area outside. Leah even took out her notebooks and wrote detailed accounts of her ordeal. Though too small to physically overpower her captor, she realized she could still fight back in her own way. As night fell, the man returned. Leah noticed his disheveled tie and knew what awaited her. The same unspeakable torment she had endured the previous night. But she resolved to stay strong, thinking of her family and their love for her. On the morning of May 4th, Leah woke to the sound of commotion outside. Alone in the cabin, she froze in fear, unsure of what was happening. An hour later, the man stormed in, visibly agitated, and ordered her to get dressed and pack her belongings. Leah didn't know why he seemed so panicked, but she sensed he was worried about being discovered. He threw a jacket over her head, led her outside, and forced her into the back seat of his car before driving off. As the car drove along, Leah suddenly heard the crunch of tires on gravel. The man stopped the car, stepped out, and sternly instructed her to stay silent. Leah had no idea what was happening outside, but obeyed, fearing the consequences if she didn't. Meanwhile, at the Kerrville Police Department, a call came in about a suspicious vehicle near a remote cabin in Kerrville, nearly 500 kilometers from Houston. Sergeant Belletter was dispatched to investigate. Arriving at the location, Belletter noticed a red car parked in the driveway with mismatched license plates. He had been instructed to search for a white hatchback, but what he didn't know was that the suspect had recently painted his car red to avoid detection. Initially planning to leave, but Belletter's instincts as a seasoned officer urged him to take a closer look. As he approached the car, the man suddenly emerged with a gun in hand. Leah crouched low in the back seat, remained hidden from view. Leah heard a voice shout, "Drop the gun." She recognized it as a police officer's and felt a surge of hope, but fear of a potential shootout kept her paralyzed. As the man stepped away from the car, Leah's mind raced with panic and dread. Then she realized this might be her only chance. She knew she had to run sprinting toward the police car, even if shots were fired. She decided she wouldn't stop until she reached safety. Leah mustered all her strength and dashed towards Sergeant Belletter's patrol car. Slipping into the back seat, Belletter immediately started the car, but gunshots erupted, forcing him to instruct Leah to stay low. Grabbing his police radio, Belletter called for backup. Officers were dispatched to assist, and Leah's family was notified that she had been found safe. Within 5 minutes, Belletter and Leah had left the scene and arrived at an FBI office. Meanwhile, a local pilot volunteered to fly Leah's family nearly 500 kilometers to Kerrville. As Leah was safely escorted to the Kerrville Police Department, her parents and sister were on their way to be reunited with her. At the station, Leah finally saw her family again. Her father, Tim, embraced her tightly, overcome with relief that she was safe. In that moment, Leah felt the depth of her family's love more strongly than ever before. It was a happiness she knew would remain unmatched for the rest of her life. Authorities soon identified her captor as Gary Dale Cox. The Kerrville Police Department and Sergeant Belletter quickly mobilized to approach his cabin. However, when officers neared the site, they discovered Cox lying motionless beside his vehicle, a gunshot wound to his head. He had chosen to take his own life, likely to evade justice for his crimes. While some were relieved that Cox could no longer harm anyone else, others lamented the missed opportunity to uncover more about his motives and the extent of his involvement in other kidnappings. Despite the tragedy, Leah Henry became a source of inspiration for many. Her courage and unyielding will to survive even at such a young age moved people around the world. Leah's story encouraged countless other children to stand up for themselves and seek justice. After escaping her captor and reclaiming her life, Leah pursued her dream of becoming a marine biologist. She also dedicated herself to sharing her story, hoping to inspire those who faced similar hardships to find strength and hope. Leah's journey became a testament to resilience and determination. It reminded the world that while fear and trauma may leave deep scars, facing those fears head-on is the path to overcoming them. As Brian Tracy famously said, "The only way to overcome fear is to do the thing you fear." Amid one of the most severe crises in U.S. history, driven by the opioid epidemic, one family has emerged at the center of this tragedy. Since 1999, opioid-related deaths have surged fivefold, claiming tens of thousands of American lives each year. Behind this disaster lies the story of the Sackler family and their pharmaceutical empire. The three Sackler brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond, were born into a Jewish immigrant family in Brooklyn, New York in the 1920s. All three pursued careers in medicine, but rather than treating patients directly, they chose to venture into the pharmaceutical business, a path that ultimately brought them wealth and fame. The turning point came in 1952 when they purchased Purdue Frederick, a small pharmaceutical company. Arthur, the eldest brother, was exceptionally skilled in pharmaceutical marketing, quickly realizing that the key to success wasn't just convincing patients, but more importantly, gaining the trust of prescribing doctors. When Arthur died of a heart attack in 1987, Mortimer and Raymond took over the company, renaming it Purdue Pharma. For the first 40 years, the company thrived with their flagship product, MS Contin, a morphine-based pain reliever designed with a unique time-release coating. However, as the patent for MS Contin neared expiration in the late 1980s, Purdue Pharma faced competitive pressures and declining profits. To address these challenges, they developed a new product, OxyContin, a decision that would later have grave consequences for society. As the 21st century dawned, the second generation of the Sackler family took over Purdue Pharma, with Richard Sackler appointed as the company's president. In 1999, the Sackler family remained an enigmatic symbol. The public only recognized Jonathan Sackler, Richard's brother, through a single photograph. Jonathan held a senior management position alongside Richard, as did their cousin Kathy Sackler, who served as vice president. Kathy once proudly claimed she was the one who proposed the idea for OxyContin, the product that would shape the company's future. Over time, other members of the family joined the pharmaceutical empire one by one. When OxyContin was introduced to the market, it was promoted as a groundbreaking pharmaceutical advance, advertised as superior to any other painkiller available. The main component of OxyContin, oxycodone, is a semi-synthetic opioid with twice the potency of morphine. Oxycodone belongs to a class of drugs that works similarly to morphine, effectively blocking intense, prolonged pain throughout the body. Typically, doctors prescribed opioids for complex surgeries or late-stage cancer patients. However, in cases where standard pain relievers like ibuprofen were no longer effective, opioids were also considered. Dr. Andrew Kolodny, Chief Medical Officer of the Opioid Research Group at Brandeis University, Massachusetts, and President of the Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, once noted that beyond its pain-relieving effects, opioids could reduce anxiety and induce a sense of relaxation. The euphoria and the pleasant sensations that opioids induce make them particularly prone to abuse and lead to addiction very quickly. Purdue Pharma claimed it had overcome these risks in OxyContin by using a unique formulation technology. Similar to MS-Contin, OxyContin was coated with a special layer to release the active ingredient gradually into the bloodstream, extending pain relief for up to 12 hours and supposedly reducing the addiction risk by controlling the high effect. OxyContin was marketed as a safer, superior alternative to other painkillers on the market. However, these claims were later proven to be entirely false. Far from being safe, OxyContin carried hidden, deadly dangers. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, plays a critical role in regulating and approving medications before they reach the market and ideally should have identified Purdue Pharma's misleading claims about OxyContin. However, a suspicious detail emerged. Curtis Wright, the official responsible for OxyContin's review at the FDA, had close ties to Purdue Pharma, casting a dark shadow over the approval process. In 1995, the FDA not only approved OxyContin, but also allowed the company to promote it as having a low addiction risk. Notably, just 1 year after OxyContin's approval, Curtis Wright left the FDA to join Purdue Pharma with a $400,000 annual salary, 3 times his previous income. Thanks to this approval, OxyContin officially launched in 1996, rapidly filling pharmacy shelves and reaching hundreds of thousands of Americans. Purdue's marketing strategy for OxyContin was highly sophisticated. Instead of targeting consumers directly, Purdue focused on physicians, the gatekeepers who could prescribe the drug. Since OxyContin was a powerful prescription painkiller, the company's profits depended entirely on whether doctors chose to prescribe it. Initially, many physicians were cautious about prescribing OxyContin for ordinary patients due to concerns about addiction risks. To alleviate these concerns, Purdue rolled out an extensive promotional campaign to convince the medical community of the drug's unique benefits. In 1998, Purdue released a promotional video titled "I Got My Life Back," which was sent to 15,000 doctors. The video depicted patients who were freed from pain thanks to OxyContin and dismissed concerns about opioid addiction, framing them as unfounded misconceptions. In reality, Purdue's scientific basis was highly questionable. They cited a brief letter published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980, in which Dr. Herschel Jick and a graduate student, Jane Porter, reported that among nearly 12,000 hospitalized patients treated with opioids, only 4 developed addiction. However, this study had significant limitations as it focused solely on hospitalized patients under close medical supervision, which didn't represent typical opioid use in real-world conditions. Purdue shrewdly distorted this information, using it as scientific evidence to claim that less than 1% of patients would become addicted. This message was deliberately conveyed to doctors. OxyContin was safe and should be prescribed more widely. Not content with the 1% figure, Purdue further intensified its marketing by asserting OxyContin's absolute safety, claiming it didn't induce euphoria and thus posed no risk of addiction. To reinforce their claims, Purdue employed manipulated charts, distorting data about opioid blood concentration, an important metric that reflects the drug's effects on the body and its addiction potential. Purdue sales representatives were sent across the U.S. meeting doctors individually and using falsified graphs along with unsubstantiated claims of a less than 1% addiction rate to convince them to prescribe OxyContin. To further incentivize their staff, Purdue offered substantial commissions to employees who successfully persuaded doctors to prescribe the drug. They even provided videos for doctors to show their patients aimed at erasing any concerns about the medication. Purdue's marketing strategy didn't stop at simply persuading doctors to write prescriptions. Once patients were prescribed OxyContin, they implemented sophisticated tactics to maintain and increase the drug's consumption. One prime example was a coupon program for the first 5 OxyContin prescriptions. Although promoted as a financial aid policy, It was actually a strategy to foster long-term dependency on the drug. Internal Purdue documents exposed this objective, noting that 39% of patients continued using OxyContin after 90 days due to the discount offer. The result of these marketing efforts was a staggering surge in OxyContin prescriptions, initially numbering 670,000, with growth reaching unprecedented levels. By 1997, just 5 years after its release, OxyContin prescriptions had increased nearly tenfold. As the market expanded, Purdue Pharma continued to introduce versions of OxyContin in increasingly higher doses. Initially offered in 10 milligrams tablets, the company later released 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, and even 160 milligrams options, a particularly dangerous concentration. As the 2000s began, OxyContin's remarkable success caught the attention of other pharmaceutical companies. Recognizing the enormous profit potential in the opioid market, pharmaceutical giants joined the race. The revenue generated by the opioid industry skyrocketed from $6.1 billion in 2006 to $8.5 billion in 2012. Notably, 2012 marked a peak in opioid prescriptions in the U.S. with a staggering 255 million prescriptions, equivalent to more than 80% of the American population receiving an opioid prescription within a single year. The result of this explosion was a nation awash in potent painkillers. Amid this environment, some physicians became corrupted, exploiting their prescription power to act as drug dealers in white coats. Interstate opioid smuggling networks emerged and flourished to such an extent that criminals dubbed them the Blue Highway, a reference to the light blue hue of the sought-after pills circulating in the black market. Perhaps most alarming was the indifference of regulatory agencies. Both the FDA and government authorities at various levels appeared either powerless or lacking in commitment to controlling the situation. No effective intervention was launched to shield the public from the opioid wave, which gradually grew into a public health disaster. The regulatory and oversight failures left severe, far-reaching consequences for American society. Opioids possess extremely potent and fast-acting addictive properties, altering brain receptors in a way that fosters severe dependency. When people attempt to stop using opioids, they face harsh withdrawal symptoms, and continued use often leads to overdose, heart failure, and death. With OxyContin in particular, the pill's coating could be easily broken, releasing the active ingredient more rapidly and powerfully, which heightened the risks of addiction and overdose. In the early 2000s, drug-related deaths in the U.S. began to spike, with many cases directly linked to OxyContin. Although doctors and politicians were quick to notice this alarming trend, but it wasn't until 2010 that the first control measures were enacted. New regulations were introduced to limit access to prescription opioids, including 2 national guidelines on high-dose opioid prescriptions alongside price adjustments for the medication. Purdue Pharma responded by improving the drug formulation, making it more difficult to break the pill's coating. However, these efforts came too late. By then, a large number of Americans had already fallen into the grip of opioid addiction. As access to prescription drugs became harder and more expensive, many people turned to heroin, a cheaper but stronger and more dangerous alternative. As a result, heroin overdose deaths surged, increasing by 286% from 2002 to 2013, further exacerbating the crisis. In the 2010s, the arrival of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin, worsened the drug crisis. Fentanyl was often mixed with other drugs such as cocaine and heroin, increasing their potency without the user's knowledge, leading to a greater risk of overdose. Just a small dose of fentanyl could be lethal, creating a terrifying danger. This issue was highlighted in 2022 when the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, seized enough fentanyl to potentially kill nearly the entire U.S. population. The opioid crisis has claimed the lives of more than 500,000 Americans, particularly devastating the southeastern states. In these areas, nearly everyone knows someone who has died from opioids. Currently, the U.S. leads the world in per capita opioid consumption, far outpacing other countries at an alarming rate. All of these tragedies can be traced back to one source: the Sackler family and OxyContin, the drug that opened the door to America's opioid disaster. According to Fox News, OxyContin has generated $35 billion for Purdue Pharma since its launch. making the Sackler family one of the wealthiest in U.S., with an estimated net worth of $11 billion. For decades, the Sacklers built a reputation as major philanthropists, donating to prestigious museums and universities. Their name appeared on cultural and educational landmarks from the Louvre Museum to Harvard University's Sackler Museum of Art. In 2007, when Purdue Pharma was first brought to court for deceptive marketing campaigns, the Sackler family skillfully kept their names out of the lawsuit. Although the company pleaded guilty and paid a $634 million fine, the family members faced no legal charges. In reality, they had known about the high addiction potential of OxyContin even before the drug was approved. Richard Sackler, the CEO of Purdue Pharma, likely became aware of the drug's abuse potential within the first year of its release. By 2000, the company had detailed reports about the growing issue, but instead of adjusting the product, Richard Sackler chose to blame the addicts. This lack of responsibility was evident in a 2001 internal email from Richard, where he emphasized that the company needed to find a way to blame the abusers of OxyContin, calling them immoral criminals and the real problem. The coldness and unethical behavior of Purdue Pharma's leadership in dealing with the consequences of their product continued to be exposed. Today, Purdue faces over 2,000 lawsuits related to OxyContin and its role in the opioid crisis. Under public and legal pressure, Sackler family members were finally forced to testify. Richard Sackler claimed to have no memory of anything from the several hours of questioning. His son David Sackler continued to defend OxyContin, while Curtis Wright, the creator of OxyContin, stated that he felt no remorse. Some family members even created a website to seek public support in an attempt to salvage their tarnished reputations. In 2020, Purdue Pharma once again pleaded guilty and reached a settlement with the court. The Sackler family agreed to pay $6 billion in damages for the opioid crisis, and the company was ordered to be dissolved. In return, the Sackler family was granted immunity from future lawsuits. However, their immense wealth remained intact thanks to their decision to withdraw $10 billion from Purdue Pharma in 2008, ensuring their fortune remained largely unaffected. By 2018, the Sackler family was facing mounting pressure from a series of lawsuits related to the distribution and marketing of OxyContin. This led to Purdue Pharma filing for bankruptcy in September 2019. While they still held on to their massive fortune, but the Sackler family's reputation was irreparably damaged. The name Sackler was now associated with the pain and loss of hundreds of thousands of Americans. In March 2019, many prestigious museums began removing the Sackler name from their galleries and rejecting donations from the family, marking the complete downfall of a once-admired empire. The opioid crisis and the Sackler family's role in it have been depicted in influential cultural works. Notably, Patrick Radden Keefe's investigative book Empire of Pain and the TV series Dopesick have exposed the details of one of the most significant medical tragedies in U.S. history. This tragedy stemmed from the insatiable greed of a billionaire family, as OxyContin was aggressively marketed not for genuine medical needs, but simply because the Sacklers wanted to expand their already enormous wealth. The failure of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in its regulatory role stands as a troubling example of how regulatory bodies can be manipulated, losing their function of safeguarding public health. Thousands of doctors across the U.S. unknowingly became victims of a systematic fraud campaign, turned into instruments for distributing addictive drugs. OxyContin pulled countless Americans into the whirlpool of opioid addiction, and as prescription drug supplies were tightened, society witnessed an alarming shift as addicts turned to the black market, with even more catastrophic consequences. The price of this tragedy continues to be paid every day, with an American dying of a drug overdose every 8 minutes. This heartbreaking statistic reflects the immense scale of the opioid crisis. The story of OxyContin and the Sackler family serves as a profound warning about how greed, a failure in government oversight, and prioritizing profit over public health can lead to unimaginable consequences. This is not just a tragedy for the U.S., but a valuable lesson for the world about the importance of stringent regulation in the pharmaceutical industry and upholding ethics in business. What are your thoughts on this story? Feel free to leave a comment below to share your perspective. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.